Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guest Kate-Davies. And she's here today to talk with us about her new book, Intrinsic-Hope, Living Courageously in Troubled Times. Now, Kate has worked on environmental and social issues her entire career. She set up and managed the City of Toronto's Environmental Protection Office and established and directed a successful environmental policy consulting company. Kate is currently a clinical associate professor at the School of Public Health at the University of Washington and emeritus faculty at Antioch University. Her written work has been published in newspapers, magazines, and journals, and she is the author of Rise of the U.S. Environmental Health Movement. So let's welcome to the show, Kate.
Thank you.
Oh, what a pleasure it is to have you here. And I'm so glad that we're talking about your new book. I mean, my goodness, I think for a lot of people, they're just grasping for this kind of information.
Yeah, that was kind of why I wrote the book, because a lot of my friends I've been talking to, and I found that they were feeling pretty down about the future. And in my own work on environmental issues for a very long time, I've been feeling kind of sad and hopeless and at times angry and frustrated. And I realized that I really needed a way to think differently about hope. And I hope that what I've done is helpful for others.
Well, and so, with your book, it really does cover, because it covers the environment and what's going on with it. And I think a lot of people, we hear such negative news, and it could feel very hopeless at times with what's happening, just, on a global scale with everything. When you were doing your research for this book, did it take you a long period of time? Was it more like a research on hope? Where did you go with that?
Yeah, so my process was that the research that I did was really on my own feelings and my own experience. A fair amount has been written on hope in the past, but it tends to be from a religious perspective or from an academic perspective. And I really wanted to explore how I could be more hopeful in these difficult times. And so my research was really about my own experience. And sometimes I talk to my friends and others about their experiences of hope. But fundamentally, this isn't really an academic book, and it's certainly not a religious book. But it's really a book grounded in my own experience. And it actually didn't take me all that long. It followed on my first book, which was published in 2013 and is called The Rise of the U.S. Environmental Health Movement. And when I finished that book and it was published, the topic of hope just kind of emerged naturally in my mind as something I really wanted to pay attention to and work on. And so this book on hope actually came out almost 5 years to the day after my environmental health book, which in the world of book writing actually isn't that long, especially if you're a slow writer. And I'm a slow writer.
Well, and you talk about such profound topics, because when we look at the global eco-social crisis that we're going through, it covers things like water, and we've got species that are going extinct, and pollution, and environmental justice, and all these range of things. And so it can seem daunting for people just individually. It's like, gosh, all these things are happening. How can I find, how can I find myself a thread of hope so I don't end up in despair?
Yeah, well, that was exactly where I was coming from, because, with my work on environmental issues and working on lots of different ones, I was feeling really, really hopeless at times. I think one of my worst encounters with environmental despair or hopelessness was I talk about this in the book, was back in the mid-1980s when I was working in Toronto in Canada, and I was on a bus tour of Love Canal, the toxic waste site in upper New York State that was leaking toxic contaminants into the Niagara River and hence into Lake Ontario, which is the source of drinking water for over 40 million Americans and Canadians. And when I was on that bus tour, I just am looking at where the people had lived in Love Canal. By that time, the residents had been evacuated. Just looking at row after row of empty houses and streets and, occasionally garden tools left outside and kids' tricycles and just the kind of desolate, silent emptiness of that place really put me into a state of utter despair about the way that we treat the environment and the way we treat each other as well. And so my kind of my sense of hopelessness and despair goes back a very long time. And as I say, ultimately it was something I decided I had to work on. And I think when we focus at a global level, it's or even at a national level, it's really easy to fall into that despair because it seems so impossible that will solve problems at that kind of level. And I think one of the things that I'm suggesting in the book Intrinsic Hope is that we really just do what we can when we can, wherever we are, and do it the very best we can, and just take small steps. Just do whatever we can, rather than trying to fix the whole world. It's just too much to try to do that. Too overwhelming, really, if we try to do that.
Yeah, it could be. If you look at just one thing, if we talk about water scarcity, there's so much there. If we talk about water conservation, so much there to focus on all the different, items that's on our plate would be kind of a little much.
Yeah. The real heart of this book is to really look at hope in a different way. And I think that, it really fits in with what you're saying. And looking at hope not in terms of the specific outcomes that we hope to achieve, but rather seeing hope as an inner attitude, as an outlook on life, if you like, that doesn't necessarily depend on actually achieving results. And that's pretty different from how we ordinarily think about hope. We can say, well, I hope it's a sunny day tomorrow, or I hope that I'll see an end to climate change, or something like that. And in both of those cases, there is a specific outcome that we are hoping for, something specific, and it's usually something in the external world that we don't currently have. But we can also, so it's a hope for something. But there's another way to see hope, and that's seeing it as an outlook on life that really doesn't depend on achieving anything specific, but really is how we approach life. Do we approach life with an open, positive attitude that doesn't necessarily expect results, but we take action because we do things for the environment, because we are caring, loving people. We have hope in things rather than hope for things, and that's for me, it's been a pretty important distinction to make, and I think that one of the big steps for me, or one of the kind of aha moments for me in this was Václav Havel, the former president of Czechoslovakia. what he said about hope, and it's a pretty well-known quote, but it's so powerful. And he says something like this, and I think in this quote he's talking about intrinsic hope, even though he doesn't call it that. But he says, hope is a state of mind, not a state of the world. It's a dimension of the soul. It's not essentially dependent on some particular observation of the world or estimate of the situation. So in other words, hope is an internal thing. It doesn't depend on how the world is doing or what we want to happen. He goes on, it's an orientation of the heart. It transcends the world that is immediately experienced and is anchored somewhere beyond its horizons. And then there's another equally powerful paragraph after that. But we can see hope as this internal capacity, that there's a hope in life itself rather than in achieving specific results that we might want to see. So does that make sense? Does that resonate at all?
It does. It really does. And I think it provides people not just a new way of looking at these issues and finding some resolution within their heart about it, but also to kind of cultivate greater capacity, like a greater level of hope for them altogether.
Yeah, I mean that's really what it's about. The truth is that we can't control life. We can't control what happens. We may be able to influence things a little bit, but we can't control life because it's simply too complex. And because we can't control life, we can't control whether our hopes, if we're hoping for something, we can't control whether that hope will be fulfilled or not. And as I'm sure you know, familiar with, life doesn't always meet our hopes, and in fact, often it doesn't. And when life doesn't meet our hopes, then we end up feeling disappointed, sad, frustrated, angry, grief, full of grief sometimes, all of a whole basket of unpleasant emotions that are all based on an unmet expectation or unmet expectations. And intrinsic hope doesn't have that kind of expectation, so it doesn't come with that kind of shadow side that extrinsic hopes often come with. So it's really a question of how can we cultivate the intrinsic hope that we have inside us, and really feel more hopeful in our hearts. Not that we will necessarily solve the problems we face, but that we are able to do something about them. And there's a difference there, I think.
Oh, a huge difference, because it's kind of letting go of control of the outcome. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. It's exactly letting go of the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Is that some of the ways that people can nurture a greater sense of hope in their own lives?
Absolutely. It's how people can nurture a greater sense of hope in their lives. And it's not always easy to give up on outcomes. Because we want things to be a certain way. We all want to be happy and content, and often we want other people to be happy and content. So we want specific results. So giving up on outcome isn't always easy. Thomas Merton has a wonderful quote. Thomas Merton, the theologian, he said, "Do not depend on the hope of results, or you may have to face the fact that your work will be apparently worthless and achieve no result at all." It's that kind of thinking that I'm talking about. So it is hard to give up. I'm not saying that it isn't, and there's nothing wrong with extrinsic hopes. I also want to say that, because extrinsic hopes are, when you anticipate something, when you look forward to, achieving a particular outcome, there's a pleasant feeling. Anticipating something positive always comes with a kind of pleasurable feeling. So it gives us something, that sense of something that we want. And it can also, extrinsic hopes can also give us goals to work towards. For example, if I say something like, I hope to lose weight, then I have a goal to work towards, or I want to stop climate change, then I have a goal to work towards. But the truth is that with extrinsic hopes, there's no guarantee that we will actually work towards that goal. And of course, then when we don't lose weight or we don't stop climate change, then that's when we get all of those unpleasant emotions coming up when our extrinsic hopes aren't met. So it's not that extrinsic hope is bad or wrong. It's perfectly natural. We all have extrinsic hopes. It's just that we need to be aware of their shadow side and aware that there is, I think, this other form of hope that really doesn't depend on getting our hopes met.
Now, is that some of the things that you see, kind of the shadow side of hope, for people that work, let's say, like on environmental or social issues?
Yes, I mean, I've certainly seen this in many environmental activists. You know, their extrinsic hopes for success are so strong, and they work so hard to achieve them, that when they don't get what they want, there's huge disappointment and often burnout, and and people get tired and depressed and so on. You know, I had a friend who's a very well known environmental activist, and she always used to say to me, she said, "I'm on the end of a 911 line for the planet," and by that she meant that she felt pretty much solely responsible for solving the environmental crisis single-handedly. And, you know, she was a very extremely dedicated person, and she worked, almost 24/7 for many years, and then she had a breakdown and was incapacitated for quite a while, because she was just completely burnt out. She was completely burnt out because her hopes were not being met, and it was really sad to see that. But because of that, I think she learned to moderate her hopes somewhat, and to be a little bit more realistic about her own capacities, and also what was actually possible to achieve. She was able to kind of give up a little bit on achieving outcomes, but extrinsic hopes can be very powerful and very strong for any social activist of any sort, or environmental activist, and I think it's really something to watch and to look at, and to be aware that we may not stop climate change. We may not clean up pollution. We may not achieve a just, sustainable, and healthy world that we would like to see. But that doesn't mean that we don't take action at all. It means we do whatever we can. We can have aspirations. We can certainly have aspirations and want to aspire to achieve things, but just not be so attached to actually achieving them. Be more open. So it's more about possibility rather than expectation, or as I said, aspiration instead of anticipation. It's a more open way of seeing things and seeing the problems that we face.
Well, in your book, you talk about environmental grief. And I would love for you to explain what that is for our listeners and expand on that for us.
Oh, environmental grief. Environmental grief is really a developing topic these days, certainly in the academic literature and also in the psychological literature. And there have been several books written about it. And it's really the grief that we feel, the sadness that we feel for the damage that we're doing to the environment. It's really about feeling the grief for the death of the planet, and whether it's an individual species or whether it's whether it's an ecosystem that's being plowed under or have concrete built over it or whatever. It's really it's like the grief that we feel when a loved one dies. It's similar to that. But what's different about environmental grief is that because the destruction of the environment is ongoing, and it keeps on going and is getting worse, we can't completely process our grief for the environment. When somebody dies, usually there's a period of intense mourning, and then you kind of come to accept the new reality of life without the person who's passed away. You never forget, of course, and there's always a kind of low level of grief. But with environmental grief, it's different because it stays in our faces. Every night there's a different news story about the latest environmental disaster or the latest species going extinct or whatever it is. So environmental grief doesn't. It's persistent. It doesn't go away, and that makes it especially hard to deal with. And the other thing that makes environmental grief hard to deal with is that we caused this crisis. We, the human species, caused this crisis. It isn't as if it just happened to us, or if it's natural, if it's just the way that nature works. When somebody who's old dies. No, we caused this crisis, and we know we caused this crisis because that's what the science is telling us. So that also makes environmental grief doubly difficult to work with, I think. And it's not something that goes away. When I talk about intrinsic hope in the book, it's really important for people to know that that it's not like you get intrinsic hope and then you don't grieve anymore, or you don't feel sad anymore, or you don't feel disappointed anymore. That's not it at all. Intrinsic hope is something that we can draw on and use and cultivate to help us cope with our grief, our sadness, our anger, our frustration about not only how we treat the environment, but how we treat other people, social justice issues, discrimination issues, the Me Too movement, all of these things. It doesn't mean that our feelings about them, that the painful feelings, the difficult feelings go away at all, but it does mean that we have a way of coping with them and dealing with them that, in my experience, has been a lifesaver, quite frankly. And I still get, I still weep tears for what we're doing for the planet. I still get really angry. But now I have a set of tools. I have the idea and the practices that nurture intrinsic hope to help me deal with those feelings, and that's huge for me. It's been huge.
Well, I can see where your book is such a great resource for people that are dealing with that, because I've got to tell you, every time I turn on the news and there's a new animal that's going extinct, and because of what mankind is doing, it breaks my heart. And so, it seems like we're constantly going through these different levels of grief for, either animals or in the environment or anything that's going on. So I can see how your book is helping people look at a brighter side when sometimes it feels like there just none exists.
Yeah. I mean, what's important is not to avoid the grief or deny the grief or to try to stuff it under and pretend it's not there. I think in our society there's a tendency for us to try to avoid painful and difficult emotions like grief. We tend to put on a bright, smiley face and say, yeah, I'm okay, I'm fine, everything's great. And inside, we feel just awful. We feel dreadful. We feel, grief. And that's actually probably the worst thing that we can do, because the grief doesn't go away. It just kind of festers there in the unconscious or even in the conscious and just gets worse. But if we can acknowledge it and name it, and say, yeah, I feel grief, or I feel awful about what's happening, and really be specific about what those feelings are, and open to them, begin to open ourselves to them, then we can deal with them, then we can work with them. But as long as we deny them and avoid them and pretend they don't exist, we can't do that. We can't work on them. And so, anyone who's been in therapy knows this. The first thing that you do with your therapist is you tell them how you feel. You name the feelings that are going on. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about really naming whether it's grief or sadness or anger, whatever the emotion is that's coming up about the state of the world, is naming it and recognizing it, and then we're able to work with it. And working with it by saying, yeah, that was based on a particular expectation about how I want things to be. And that expectation isn't being fulfilled. It's not being met. So how can I look at things differently? And we look at things differently with this lens of what I call intrinsic hope.
Well, on that note, we are going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Kate Davies on her new book, Intrinsic Hope. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed, and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 123 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're speaking with author Kate Davies today on her book, Intrinsic Hope. So, Kate, I have a question here for you. You have this unique background. It qualifies you in a way that most people really couldn't answer some of these questions that we've been talking about today. But with your unique background, do you feel that it's even possible for us to get to a point of positive social change?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I taught social change for 15 years at Antioch University. And so I've, part of my, one of my careers was looking at social change very deeply. And, social change and the role of social movements in social change is just amazing. And social movements have really been the most powerful force for social change throughout human history. And it's really important to remember that. And to if we get hooked into the belief that we can't change things, then we've already lost the game. Because if we think we can't make a difference, then we won't bother to do anything. So I'm not saying that for 1 minute. I'm saying we do whatever we can where we are when we can, to the best of our ability. And by working with other people, that's how things get changed. The power holders, what I call the power holders, people in political or economic, who hold political or economic power, they often want ordinary people to think that things can't be changed because it's not in their interests. It's not in the power holders' interests for things to be changed. I remember Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. She was Prime Minister in England. She always used to say, "There is no alternative. There is no alternative." It's absolutely not true. There are always alternatives. There are always different ways of doing things. There are always other options. And by exploring those, that's how we make social change happen. I just look at, recent history in this country, the Me Too movement, for example, or equality marriage. These are major social changes and processes that couldn't necessarily have been predicted, that happened relatively fast. Now, social change doesn't always happen fast. Usually it's pretty slow. But absolutely, social change is happening all the time. And that's a really, positive social change is a good thing. And by staying engaged and being positive, I think we can all play a role in that. In whatever realm of life we are active in or working in.
Do you feel like globally that people are demanding certain things now than they ever have before in history?
Yes, I do. Could you say more about what you mean by demanding certain things? What were you thinking of?
Well, in regards to like the environment, what our expectation is for our planet and for us as a species and for the planet, the animals that we share this planet with. Do you feel like there's things that, more people are kind of demanding that we look at these topics more seriously probably than we have in the past?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. So I think one of the contributing factors to this is that we're now thinking globally as a species in a way that we weren't maybe 60, 70 years ago. I can remember watching Neil Armstrong land on the moon and take that first step for mankind, and I can also remember the first shots, photographs of the Earth from space. And those had an amazing influence, I think, on the collective psyche of our species, at least those that had access to them, to those photos, because they enabled us to see the Earth as a system, as a whole object, without any borders or boundaries. without the separations and divisions that we tend to make into countries or politics or whatever. And so I think that global thinking has really been very powerful, and of course the rise of the internet is another powerful force for global thinking. So I think we are looking at problems in a global way that we didn't, as I say, 60, 70 years ago. And I think that's a good thing because it enables us to see the scale and the magnitude of the effects that we're causing, and the scale and the magnitude of the changes that are needed to resolve those problems, whether or not we achieve anything. So I think people are definitely more hungry for solutions and demanding more. And I mean, let's face it, things are getting a lot worse too, than a long time ago. We are running out of fresh water. The population of the earth is rising rapidly. We are losing species at a very alarming rate. All of these signs and symptoms that we are facing a global crisis. We know so much more than we used to about them, and I think that is really waking people up. And also, people are actually experiencing the effects for themselves. About 10 years ago, I met my first climate refugees, a couple from Australia who decided they were Australians. They lived in Australia all their lives, and they decided that they had to emigrate. They could not live with the heat in the summers anymore, and this was like 10 years ago. And they ended up moving to the Pacific Northwest because they just couldn't tolerate the climate in Australia anymore. So people are experiencing the effects of the environmental crisis personally, and I think that can make a significant difference too in what people are asking for and what people want. So yeah, personal experience, more scientific information, and really seeing things globally, I think all contribute to demands for action on the environment, for action on social justice issues as well.
I really appreciate you expanding on that, because it's something that I think a lot of times people, when they look at this big, huge picture, can be like, gosh, I have no idea how I can, just little me, can help contribute to finding a solution or helping, with any of these issues. And so it kind of leads me to, talking about hope. And I know you discuss this in your book, and I'd love for you to share with us about it, just how, is hope something that could be a learned trait, or is it something you're born with?
That's a great question. So I think both are true. Mm-hmm. So I think that we are all born with hope. I think that intrinsic hope is an innate quality of all life. This morning I saw a flock of birds weaving and diving and just playing in the sky, and that feeds my hope. I see hope in the dandelion that grows in a crack in a downtown sidewalk, despite the fact that there's no sun and probably not much water and not much sunlight either. Yet that dandelion grows. It grows there. Or I think there's intrinsic hope in the way that a maple tree or any other type of tree might scatter hundreds of thousands of seeds, not not knowing whether any of them will germinate and grow. It doesn't matter whether any of them will germinate or grow. The act of producing the seeds is a hopeful act. Or the way in the Pacific Northwest here that our salmon swim back to their natal rivers and streams struggling to swim upstream to lay their eggs, even though they're going to die once they've laid their eggs. That's intrinsic hope to me. So I like to say that intrinsic hope is sewn into our genes. It's just innate in life itself, and life is inherently hopeful to me. The sun comes up every day. Spring always follows winter. Day follows night. That is life's inherent hopefulness to me, and I think it's really important. And even if there's runaway climate change or I hope not, nuclear war or something absolutely catastrophic, life will continue because it has intrinsic hope. There is this quality of life loving itself, and at one point in the book I say that intrinsic hope could be described as life's love for itself. So it is inside all of us, just as it's inside nature. That said, I think we can tend to overlook or forget about that intrinsic hopefulness. We live in such a kind of problem-oriented society that we tend to focus on what's wrong with life rather than on what's good or right with life. And this focus on problems tends to drag us down and make us criticize life and see what's not hopeful. But so it's also, even though we have intrinsic hope inside us, I think it's really important to cultivate it and to focus on it as a capacity that we can develop. And yes, I think it can be learned. And I say that based on my own experience. My own experience, was one of feeling really, really hopeless and depressed about the state of the world. And then through through uncovering my own intrinsic hope and looking at what I call the habits of hope in the book, how we can cultivate intrinsic hope, I would say it's made a huge difference to me. I do believe that hope can be learned, and that's based, as I say, on my own personal experience of it. So that's a hopeful thing, that we can learn it, that we can learn hope. That's a very hopeful thing to say, and it's one of the reasons in the book that I describe for having hope, is that we can learn it. We can develop it. We can cultivate it. Yeah, definitely.
Well, and I think that's so encouraging for some people that feel that either they look at the glass as half empty, in life, yeah. and hope isn't really something that comes naturally to them. Maybe they're a little pessimistic just in general. So developing a hopeful attitude is possible, not so much of a reach.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think a lot of it depends on how we regard the uncertainty of life. And when I say that, let me say a little bit more. Life is fundamentally uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, next year. We don't even know what's going to happen today. We think we know, but life often throws in a curveball and gives us surprises. So life is fundamentally uncertain. And the question is, how do we regard that uncertainty? Do we regard that uncertainty with fear and project gloomy things, bad things onto that uncertainty, or do we project onto that uncertainty what I might call don't know mind, that we don't know. We don't know. We don't, and we can also project positive things on it as well, extrinsic hopes, for example. But in either case, it's not reality. So how we respond to uncertainty, I think, is the uncertainty that's inherent in life is really, really important. Can we tolerate living with the ambiguity of not knowing what's going to happen next and not being able to control it, or do we project our fears on the future? And I'm not saying here that scientific predictions about the future are not valid or not appropriate. Absolutely they are. And, scientific predictions has gotten a whole lot better during my career, during the last 40 years. But prediction is not certainty. Prediction is still not certainty. We don't know what's going to happen. And can we see that as an opportunity, not just as a problem? And that's what I don't want to say I'm optimistic, though. It's this middle road between being pessimistic and optimistic and just moving forward, not knowing, but trusting in life, trusting in the unfolding of life, and in the human capacity to respond to it positively. We all have that, if we choose to use it. And that's really what I'm talking about in this book.
Well, and also in your book, you touch on gratitude. And how does that play a part in all of this?
Oh, gratitude is one of my habits of hope, because in my experience, when we express gratitude for our lives and for the gifts that we've been given, then it makes us feel more hopeful. It makes me feel more hopeful. So, you can do a little exercise for yourself, just think about, and anyone can do this, just think about something that you are grateful for in your life. It could, and there is something that everyone can feel grateful for in their lives, no matter what their circumstances or conditions. Just grateful to be alive, to have the gift of life that someone gave birth to you. The gift of eyes to see or ears to hear or arms to hug each other. These are precious, precious gifts that we often forget about. And just reflecting on those basic gifts that we have, just see how you feel inside your body. Do you feel more hopeful? Do you feel more open? Do you feel warmer? Or do you shut down and feel constricted? Well, no. Mostly when we feel grateful, we feel more open, we feel warmth, we feel a spaciousness, we feel more positive when we express gratitude. And so that helps to build intrinsic hope. And we can be, being grateful really strengthens our relationships as well with each other, and builds communities and builds trust between people. So expressing gratitude, not just thinking about gratitude, but actually expressing it, is I find it to be a very powerful habit of hope, for intrinsic hope, for cultivating intrinsic hope. It just makes me feel better. It's not only whether that gratitude is acknowledged by the person that I'm directing it to or not. It doesn't matter. Just the act of expressing gratitude can make us feel more hopeful, can make us feel better. And it doesn't change all the bad stuff that's happening in the world, but it puts it in a different perspective. And I think that's important. A specific example, I live not very far from where the Oso landslide happened a few years ago, and half of a mountain slid off a mudslide and killed more than 40 people. And that was a huge tragedy. And And at the same time, then what happened was the relief workers came in, the emergency people, everyone sent donations. There was accommodation provided for people who were displaced, and everyone was there to help. And so even though there was a huge disaster unfolding, we can still be grateful that that the first responders were there, the emergency people, the Red Cross was there. Everyone was helping out. People were sending money from across the country to help the people who were affected. That's an amazing thing to be grateful for. It doesn't diminish the scale or the effects of the disaster at all, but it means that we can also be grateful for how people responded. So that's kind of what I'm talking about with expressing gratitude. It can definitely it makes me feel more hopeful and more positive.
If there's one thing you can leave our listeners with today in regards to hope, what would that be?
That's a great question. I think what I would say is to encourage folks to uncover that intrinsic hope inside themselves, and to really cherish that, and to try to develop it. Remembering that intrinsic hope is an attitude to life. It's an outlook on life that doesn't depend on achieving specific results, the outcomes that we want. It is something in us. It's an attitude to life that we can uncover and nurture at any time, and that's a profoundly hopeful thing to do, I think.
Move that forward. Well, and so, Kate, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and also learn more about intrinsic hope?
So they can connect with me through the book, of course, and at the end of the book, I have a final section called an invitation, and I'm inviting readers of the book to connect with me. I have a special email address. It's intrinsic-hope@gmail.com, to let me know if the ideas in the book resonate with them or not, if they have any stories about intrinsic hope and how they've worked with it that they'd like to share with me. So I invite anyone who's reading the book to get in touch with me directly through that email address, intrinsic-hope@gmail.com. I also have a website, kate-davies.org, which has a section on intrinsic hope and talks about it and some of the things that are in the book. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me or to be added to my mailing list, there are forms to do that. I really do want to connect with people around this idea of intrinsic hope and see if it's helpful for them or how they would add to it or build on it, and what their experiences are. So that would be great.
Well, Kate, I can see that you're developing a profound community to help so many people, especially, we've covered so many different topics in regards to hope and just in regards to our planet as a whole and us as a species. So thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, thank you so much, Marianne. It's just been delightful to have this conversation with you today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Kate. It's been such a pleasure to spend this time with you and, of course, to talk about your book, Intrinsic Hope. If you're looking to connect with Kate, you can at her website again. That's kate-davies.org. And her book is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all major retailers. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.